Hello, everyone. My name is Allison Dennis. I serve as Executive Director for the Sitka Center for Art and Ecology. It's my pleasure to welcome you as we all come together for our final resident talk of the spring 2022 season here at the Sitka Center. Our community, and some of you are still logging on now, our community is joining in from all over, and Sitka's roots are here on the North Central Oregon coast. We acknowledge and thank the first peoples and stewards of this place, who today are actively represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians and the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. For those who are participating from other places, if you would also like to share a land acknowledgement, you can type one to everyone in the chat. If you'd like to do that too, you can join us. We want to thank the Harold and Arlene Schnitzer Care Foundation and Jordan Schnitzer for their extraordinary sponsorship of Sitka. And thank you to all of our generous sponsors and foundations, including Schwabe, Williamson and Wyatt, McMinimans, Scott Ceramics, Framing Resource, Brian Potter Design, Park Lane Suites, Lake Oswego Festival for the Arts, Palettes Northwest, Explore Lincoln City, Siltstone Wines, McLean Printmaking Supplies, the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation, the Robert and Mercedes Eichholz Foundation, the Kinsman Foundation, Oregon Community Foundation, Oregon Arts Commission, and Oregon Cultural Trust. You fuel our work in service of artists and ecologists of all ages and experiences, including the 5 Sitka residents who will speak tonight. We want to thank Sitka's co-founders, Jane and Frank Boyden, and all 151 of Sitka's past and present board members, along with countless volunteers, neighbors, members, and financial supporters. Thanks to all who just renewed their memberships with Sitka or joined as members for the first time. We can't wait to host you on campus for workshops this summer, including one with Altea that'll kick off the season in May. She'll be sharing her work with you tonight. Tonight, if you have questions or comments, please share them and we will do our best to respond through the chat or the Q&A. We won't do live Q&A so that there's time for everyone's presentation, but you can type in questions and we can answer them through the chat for you. And with that, we're going to get started. Michelle Bardino Vela is an interdisciplinary artist and photographer. She finds inspiration for her artwork from the act of discovering and gathering natural objects that show the remains of transformation. These materials that fascinate her are the ones that can easily disintegrate and be forgotten unless they are preserved. It is her wonderment towards the cycles within the natural world and the experience of memory that is central to her practice. She received her Bachelor of Fine Art with a focus in photography, fibers, and sculpture from Florida International University, and she is currently based in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Sitka community members, near and far, please make some celebratory noise wherever you are and help welcome Michelle Bardino Vela to the Sitka Center.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I wanted to introduce myself, Michelle Bardino Vela. Thank you, Allison, for that introduction. And I just wanted to start off with saying thank you to Sitka. This last week has been one of the most beautiful of my life, so thank you so much. So first, I wanted to start off with talking about the artwork that I create. I use a lot of, as Allison mentioned, ephemeral materials that are very fragile and objects that have memories attached to them. I will be expressing a lot of the processes that I use. And I wanted to begin with showing a little bit of photography. The ideas and metaphors surrounding photography about time and memories and how it is used to seek permanence, even though life is an impermanent experience, are threads of thoughts that tie into a lot of the artwork that I create. So most of the photography that I did at first was a lot of portraiture. I would photograph the people closest to me and normally moments that felt very intimate. And this first photograph is of my cousins in Peru in Colcat Cañon. And I'm Peruvian on my mother's side and I'm Cuban Irish on my dad's side. So in my work, you're going to see a lot of the influence of Peru through ceramics, natural dyeing, and fibers. So this next picture is a portrait of my grandmother. And then all of these are on silver gelatin paper and done in the dark room. This is a photograph of my mother when she was just waking up. And these are photographs of my partner and his niece, Vika, in Ukraine. It was during that first summer visiting and meeting Vika that changed my life. Photographing her and witnessing her passion for her art completely inspired me. I would not be an artist today if it wasn't for her. So these are some more family photographs in Ukraine. And over the years, I began being drawn to still life photography. And I believe there's a lot of poetry that can be expressed through observing objects in nature. So here are a couple still lifes. So in this diptych, I began exploring forms of transformation that occur in nature. And now I'm going to go into like a lot of the artwork that I make by hand. So during my first semester for my BFA, we were asked to create a sculpture using material from after a hurricane that occurred in 2017 in Florida. And it was during that time period in October that my grandmother passed away in Peru. And the day of her passing, I had a dream of this spherical nest that was filled with a family of birds. And that was the day that we flew out to Peru to be with her after she had passed. This piece was inspired by that dream. Weaving the nest was very healing, as well as creating those dream catchers. And I used the flowers that were from her funeral that surround her photograph, as well as the flowers in the dream catchers too. So from that point forward, I couldn't stop working with ephemeral materials. I started researching and learning all of the processes that allowed me to work with the land, with fire, and with water. So with these chlorophyll prints, they're made using the heliconia leaves and are exposed in the sunlight for a couple of hours. And it's the photosynthesis that occurs in chlorophyll that allows these images to emerge. And these were my first 2 successful chlorophyll prints that I was very happy about, because I had been testing a lot of different leaf species. And now I understand what I need to look for when I do these chlorophyll prints. So then using ephemeral materials, I started to explore what it meant to witness them fading over time. So for my thesis show, I continue to explore ideas surrounding life and death and the memories that exist in between. So with this piece, Semillas, it's made from eggshells, níspero fruit skin, seeds, and threads. And the fruit was harvested from a tree that my grandfather planted at my childhood home. And in this next photograph, you can see the thread that I used to unite all of these eggshells together. And I had to really gently sew through the eggshells, sew through the fruit skins. And I was totally fascinated with how these protective layers could be so fragile, yet they can remain so intact in such a way and still be strong. And for me, I think memory is similar in an experience, in the sense that you have to, for me personally, I have to always repeat them. I have to repeat them so that they really cement themselves in my mind and strengthen my recollection. So creating this sculpture was like me repeating those memories of my grandparents and how much that shaped my upbringing. But with this next piece, Velas, it is made using philodendron leaves. The scattered moments in time are united by the ties between my maternal family members, and all of these moments primarily take place in Peru. In this photograph, at this point when I photographed it, it had already been exhibited for about 4 months, so it had already faded away a lot. For the next piece, this is Tierra a Tierra, how it was installed, and I had anthotypes on the side of it. And here they are more up close. So Tierra a Tierra are minerals that I collected from the Peruvian mountain Vinicunca. So a lot of people know it as Rainbow Mountain or Montaña de Siete Colores. And the metamorphic life of these minerals are the result of geological matter disintegrating and layering onto the earth. And eventually it rose up from the movement of the Nazca tectonic plates beneath Peru. And as it moved up, it became oxidized, and that's where all those colors, those glorious colors came to be. These minerals are held in pit-fired pinch pots, and I left the impression of my fingertips in the vessels. Here you can see it a little better. And they were wrapped with plant matter and fired in a hole in the earth. And those black hues are those plant materials disintegrating onto the ceramic piece. So as I continue to explore these cycles of life and themes of memories, I ventured into learning more alternative photographic processes. These are photograms of silver gelatin paper on silver gelatin paper. And there's cicada exoskeletons to the left from New Mexico, and on the right, it's sphinx moths, atalas, and empty orange barred sulfur chrysalises from Florida. Here are cyanotype impressions. The one on the left is kind of like a double exposure of cyanotype. And then the one on the right is using like coating the fern with cyanotype and creating an impression onto cotton fibers and doing an exposure. So then this is of cyanotype of my mother on the remains of her yerba luisa and manzanilla tea bags. And I sewed them very gently together with thread that belonged to my grandmother. Here I created this piece using the same technique as the previous piece. And it's a textile made from secondhand shirts. I bundle dyed them with rose, bougainvillea, and African tulips that were also collected in New Mexico, in Florida. And I gently suspended them to each other using thread. And with this one, I was interested in the history of the silk moths, their silk that once cocooned their bodies, and how these threads then held the bodies of the people that wore this garment. With the bundle dyeing process, the threads again cocoon the flowers that then leaves its impressions as well. So as I continued my curiosity with fibers, I began exploring hand paper making. I used hibiscus bast fibers, rose dye, rust, and wire to create this piece. The book holds 2 empty chrysalises, the Dutchman swallowtail and the zebra butterfly in it. Here is another alternative process. So this is anthotype, and I use the light sensitivity of organic matter to create this. So the light sensitivity of the beets. And I expose it out in the sunlight. So I created an emulsion. The emulsion is merging together with rust, water, alcohol, and oak gals, and it creates those dark hues that surround the living color of the beets. And those images have already faded a lot at this point. It's been about a year now. Okay, so this is an up close one. And someone told me once they look like stones, which I thought that was interesting. It's just on watercolor paper. And then over here, we have the last 2 pieces I wanted to show are a process that I found after a lot of these years of experimenting with different techniques. This first piece is called Umpimas Flores, and I used the rose petals that I gave to my grandfather at his funeral, and I wanted to find a way to preserve them. In the center, here you can see it a little better. In the center, there's a chlorophyll print on a heliconia leaf where he's smiling outside of his house in Guioja, Peru, in the Amazon. And heliconias are actually also indigenous to Peru. And I've had them in every single one of my homes that I've lived in, which has been really beautiful and symbolic. So for this last sculpture, I completed it just 2 weeks ago. I was so excited I got to photograph it before this trip. I've been working on it for like 6 months now, maybe more, but I've gotten the technique down pat, so I'm really excited. But yeah, so this is made totally from rose petals and wire. And the inspiration for this piece came from a memory from a few years back. I was searching for empty chrysalises. It was the pattern, obviously, and on a Dutchman pipe vine that was completely barren of leaves, but it was filled with hundreds of empty chrysalises. As I was searching at the base of that vine, I found the remains of shedded snakeskin wrapped around the bark. And right beside that barren vine, there was right beside that vine was a lush, beautiful bleeding hearts vine in full bloom. So it had these beautiful purple red flowers blooming. And as I was looking at that vine, a hummingbird flew right beside me, and it was hovering and observing me. So for me, it was witnessing that contrast of these 2 forms of transformation, and it really stayed with me for a long time. So this piece, when the light goes through it, here you can see it a little better, it almost feels like it's alive. Yet when the light isn't going through it, it feels like it is fading, and the tears in the petals become more visible. So when I was working on it, it was very dim lighting, and I was like, oh, this looks like it's decaying, it's strange. And then when light went through it, it just like, I was so excited. But yeah, so this sculpture is just the beginning, and I'm so looking forward to continuing to explore this process as immersive installations and large-scale sculptures. That's the end of my slideshow. Thank you guys so much. And thank you for listening to me and letting me share my art with you. Thank you guys.
Thank you, Michelle. There's some wonderful comments in the chat. Jean writes, amazing techniques using natural materials, very inspiring and beautiful. Connie writes, fantastic artworks. Ruth writes, stunning original work. Thank you so much. What a treat to get to see your work, and welcome to Sitka.
Thank you.
Gabriella Hollis immigrated to Canada during the early 1980s, grew up in northern Alberta, lived in Alaska for 7 years, and currently resides in British Columbia. She has published poetry in a variety of literary journals, including Inlandia, About Place Journal, Prairie Fire, December Magazine, Rock and Sling, the Louisville Review, the Hopper, and with forthcoming work in Ruminate, as well as fiction in the Hopper, Subterranean, Broken Pencil, and En Bloc Magazine, nonfiction in the Whitefish Review, Grain, Pilgrimage, High Country News, and forthcoming in Alaska Quarterly Review. She has received of the nomination poetry in both 2021 and 2020. She lives and writes in Tuhana Nation land. Please make some noise and welcome Gabriela Hollis to the Sitka Center.
Thank you, Allison and everyone. Yeah, I just want to start by saying, again, a huge thank you to the Sitka Center, Tamara, Allison, the rest of the staff and board, as well as the residents that I have yet to really meet. I just got here a few days ago, so I'm still wrapping my head around being here and just excited to meet everyone. A little bit more about me, like Allison mentioned, I live in southeastern BC in a bioregion known as the Rocky Mountain Trench and just outside of a small town named Kimberley. I've been there for about 2 years now, and I'm currently completing my MFA through the University of British Columbia. And for my day job, I work for an environmental nonprofit managing invasive terrestrial and aquatic species. Like mentioned, I lived in Alaska for 7 years. Prior to that, I lived in Vancouver, BC for a decade. Grew up in northern Alberta and was also born in the Czech Republic, where my entire family is from. So place and my relationship to it really matters to me. So a place like Sitka, focused on connection to nature, makes a lot of sense to me. I write poetry, fiction, and nonfiction on a variety of topics spanning immigration, family, loss of language, my time in the North, climate change, my experience of being a settler or visitor on Indigenous lands, as well as my interaction with the natural world. I'm just going to read 2 pieces focusing on the last 2 things I mentioned. The first is one of the ways in which I find a deep relevance with nature, and that's actually through hunting and writing about hunting. I'm a really avid hunter and I love seeing the elk around here. And I might assume for some different reasons than some of you. I look at them and I see their intrinsic beauty and their place here. But I also think of them as food and the joy of pursuing them during hunting season in the fall. And one of my goals is to really bring hunting out more into a literary space, as well as just to bring it more forward in our thoughts and discussions. So I'm just going to read a part of an essay I had in High Country News a couple years ago in an issue called Why Hunting Still Matters. And I'm still writing about this topic today. And the context for the story is a goat hunt I went on in Southeast Alaska. We watched a wolf silhouetted against the horizon and wondered what that lone scout smelled. Through binoculars, we examined several groups of mountain goats feeding on distant peaks high above Chilkat Lake in Southeast Alaska. My hunting partner and I sat on huge ash-colored boulders spilled on the bottom of a mountain slope at the edge of a large open basin. The goats' impossible footing as they navigated the distant gray scree made my body tense. I felt small, insignificant. As the wolf slid away from the saddle, I turned to scan the ridge behind us. And there, feeding above us, was a single goat. I had a clear sight line in the flat gray mountain light, but I needed to get closer to see in my scope the steady crosshairs fixed on her coat. My heart pounding, I contorted myself into an awkward position, belly to stone and thighs braced, the rocks under me sharp and unforgiving. I steadied my sights on her chest where I visualized her lungs. I pulled the trigger. I'd come to the mountains primarily to bring wild meat home, yet I also sought something more fundamental, a chance to feel closer to a wild animal's life and perhaps to access a part of myself that I hadn't before. The intent to take life is to discover an element most modern humans are shielded from, our untamed selves. The farther and faster we are shuttled along an ostensibly inevitable course of progress, the more disconnected we become from every other living thing. Hunting, to me, is a way to reverse that, and in doing so, become more fully myself. The night before, as the sun waned behind craggy peaks and shadows overtook our small camp, my hunting partner and I had talked of patience, fear, and loss, and she had shared some of her hunting stories with me. Usnea lichen hung in tufted masses, its pale yellow dusty cord wrapped around long dead tree limbs. My hunting partner was a firm believer in the company of fire, and I watched her coax flames to life on a small patch of cleared ground. I had worked and recreated in the wilderness and felt that was where I best connected with myself. Yet when I hiked or camped, I merely moved through landscapes as a passerby or observer. I wanted to hunt to give myself the chance to more deeply understand that life itself depends on death, to feel my hands accept the responsibility of obtaining what keeps me alive. I began to question my food habits a few years ago when I was working on a master's degree in natural resource management. My studies took me to Northwest Alaska, where Inupiat caribou hunters expressed concerns about the increase of non-local hunters, aircraft, and climate change, and the effect they were having on caribou migration. The local hunters depended on either caribou or frozen packs of beef and pork flown thousands of miles to get to their plates. Sure, I didn't eat meat, but where did the rest of my food come from, and how far had it traveled to get to me? I had always considered myself a part of nature, not apart from it. The air, the water, the animals, the trees, the animals I loved. But I began to see fishing and hunting as viable options for a way of living more in tune to what I felt was being degraded on a daily basis. Humanity's understanding that we're actually part of the earth, physical material beings, entirely dependent on the health of the very elements we come from, the water, the soil, the dirt. Back on the saddle of the ridge above Chilkat Lake, I moved my binoculars from the goat to the near vertical seam of mountain she had climbed. The strength she maintained was tremendous. Lichen, soft on my thighs, waved low in the building winds, and I settled on a bed of soft mosses. The scent of wet earth and the slight musty fragrance of plant life rose around me each time I shifted position. Fog over the lake brushed up the mountain slope where I lay, and the colors, though fixed in forest and rock, seemed to shift with folds of light and shadow. In that moment, time stilled, free of structure. My focus narrowed to just me, sole human, the lone goat, and a bed of green. I felt a purpose I hadn't felt before. There was a reason I was here, and it was not simply to enjoy the view. I thought about how the trip had merged from potential to reality, how over my lifetime I had made decisions that brought me closer to a shared ecology with other living organisms, not further away. So that's just a small excerpt from that essay. And then I just wanted to read one poem. Okay, so this poem was published in a Canadian journal called The Goose. And it references a little bit, I used to work for Fish and Game in Alaska. So some of the references are from that time. It's called Circulation of Officialdom, or A Letter Arrives on My Government Employee Desk, wherein they apologized for acts of design, regulations that failed to recognize, the way extreme hardship for many becomes negative impacts. Our predecessors were short-sighted, the way an unhappy period of history makes families still resent the past, long-term suffering and unnecessary pain, the way to reconcile the past of unintended consequences. To Indigenous people of Alaska, I read this letter at work, in a job secured by the state, good benefits after all. I traveled to ask how many, how much, do you have a permit for that? We might have crossed paths. the codified expression, 1,000 pages plus of what used to be free. I quantify, attribute use, the long chain of government claim, without the numbers to make it official, who would believe you have had a voice? And in this official apology, does regret fill the bones like marrow to provide immunity to the past? Does it change policies that might unravel the tight coil of history's reach? Names sign the line, stamp the seals, but what, I'm asking, does it mean? And the three-sided mirror of history, flat face of truth stares, harsh enough to look away. Detection, memories serve greater than words that came before. Right side cuts a shadow down the temple's shallow floor. Disbelief in familiar angles. Definition, 3 words dissected in colonizing throats. Left side floods the ear with light. Rupture of silence to a roar. Nutrition, culture, spirit. If simply called life, how would this letter read? We fail to recognize the importance of life for Indigenous peoples. Fields shackled to the law, forced to unlawfully hunt, walk the same land, led to unlawful places, tiny bones in a hand, signal unlawful motion, the unlawful infinite mind. The commercial hunt of migratory birds decimated populations in the 1900s. In 1918, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act made unlawful the use of migratory birds across North America. These regulations failed to recognize the importance of migratory birds for Indigenous peoples. It took 80 years to amend the books. That which the sea breaks against, goose, loon, black duck, tundra flats, loosened come spring, the birds wondered where you went. Sorry, I should have also said that this poem references an official letter of apology from the state. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading to us, Gabriella. There's a comment in the chat from Jean who shares, thank you for expressing the perspective on mindful hunting. Okay. Kim K is a multidisciplinary Los Angeles-based artist whose practice spans sculpture, printmaking, painting, and photography to evoke sensations of vulnerability, invasiveness, and tenderness toward the body. Kay attended the University of Arizona and went on to receive her BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute. Her work has been exhibited internationally, and she has also had solo shows in California at Local Language in Oakland, the Irvine Fine Arts Center in Irvine, Brand Stratter Gallery in Riversdale, Alter Space in San Francisco, and Bustamante Gill in Los Angeles. Kay has attended residencies at Instinct, Singapore, Mass MoCA, Irvine Fine Arts Center, and La Sierra University, and her work has been featured at Juxtapose, Artsy, and Temporary Art Review. In addition to her studio work, Kay has taught painting as an adjunct professor at La Sierra University, but tonight she is here to share her work with you. So please join me in welcoming Kim Kay to the Sitka Center.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm beyond appreciative to be here at Sitka. Thank you to the entire team and staff and the other residents. Not only do we have this incredible landscape to explore, but the studio and the feeling of the work being valued has been meaningful in itself. Thank you. So I wanted to begin with a few images of my former studio in Los Angeles. I've been traveling a bit and the studio is shifting, and I wanted to kind of show these images because I work in a number of mediums and they inform each other and kind of create a feedback loop where there's a searching and a churning, and one work starts to generate the next. I used to describe this aspect of as a flock of birds that might change formations but travel together. And since I've been here, I've been reading more about lichen and how it's a community of organisms that co-evolved, algae, fungi, and yeast, and maybe that metaphor is a bit more fitting. The different aspects in the studio kind of need one another to continue to live. So photography, painting, sculptural elements. This is an example of that kind of direct transformation where I begin with small sculptural skins that I create, sometimes casting natural forms and objects, sometimes found objects, and those kind of become a way of drawing. So the piece on the right, which is a work on paper, monoprint collagraph process, 4 years later became a sculptural piece. So the sculpture to the work, to the drawing, to the sculpture again. Sometimes the connection in the work is unintentional, and I'm a little bit shocked at the similarities found between, arriving at the work in two very different methods and materials. I'm often thinking about the body from the perspective of anatomy. I think that's where we can find those universal qualities that are not just human, but plant, animal, vegetal, fungal, and through the bones and the vascular system, it becomes less an individual and more connected to the body through the mechanics and our shared evolutionary history. The sculptures are often small and fragile. When people come to my studio, they'll want to protect them or kind of hold them like an injured bird. And when I begin to photograph them, they start to transform, and I'm thinking about them more as having a quality of resilience and vitality. And through their contractions and expansions and movements, the communication is less about the figure as a form. The figure's faceless, and it's more about the body of and the communication through movement. So the small sculptures, as I'm photographing them, they're moving through kind of a process that's almost similar to stop animation, where the sculpture is being built and torn apart. And I have been acquiring these, I call them shed skins, but it's the materials are often found or synthetic or dried paint, but they evoke the quality of the skin. And those kind of became the avenue that brought me to printmaking. So I'll run ink over the surface of the skin and put paper over the top and run them through the press. And that creates the impression of these low relief sculptural skins. Kind of thinking about the charged quality of the skin being a communicator, not only to ourselves, but to others through kind of observing the marks and scars, or, acquired wrinkles through time, and also, how our, just the psychology of how our skin communicates, maybe through blushing, or, it's our protection, our point of contact to the outside world. So these are also works on paper that have been segmented and assembled. So there's a bit of an interruption and coming together and that moment of touch kind of creates the drawing. So I've really been drawn to these forms that have the branching fractals as kind of that unifying element that we can visually see repeated at all different scales of existence. So that the dendritic synapses in our brain and the shape of lightning and river basins and estuaries and the vascular system in our lungs is all connected through this form. Universal growth systems and kind of how we can see that quality in ourselves and animals and plants, trees and roots. And I've been learning a little bit more about it recently, and Jeffrey West talks about these networks and scaling laws going into cities and even relating to our lifespan. I've been learning more about Gaia. Let's see if I can't quite see the full quote with the way that my screen is displaying. So maybe I will just let you all take that in if you desire. This quote is from Bruce Clark from his book Gaian Systems. So kind of these whole earth systems that connect living and non-living forms. The image on the left was taken here at Sitka, working with symmetry. This is a quote by Emanuele Cocha. His book, The Life of Plants, A Metaphysical Mixture, has been quite an influence. And the image is a cast of my mom's hands. I took a cast in 2019 and started photographing it right through the early days of the pandemic. This is kind of a recent exploration where I've often been working with implied movement, and I'm hoping to incorporate more of an embodied movement within the form. So this is in a very young exploratory phase. And so kind of thinking both of the skin and the breath as the location where the self connects to the living world. And I wanted to include a few images from our time together here at Sitka. We've been going down to the river's edge where the stars reflect in the water, and having that experience with the other residents together has been such a profound moment. And I know that it'll continue to inform the work. As well as the visits to the Neskowin Ghost Forest. So there's this time currently, and then there's the continuing time where it's been so fertile and nourishing that I just know that going forward, it's kind of a threshold that continues to feed into the work. So thank you all for your time and for listening, and thank you, Sitka.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'll just read, there are a bunch of wonderful comments in the chat. Jean shares, your forms are fascinating. Ruth shares, wonderful, so different, so much wow. Dreamlike landscapes. Gioia shares, wonderful repetition of patterns, layering, and different species and ecosystems. Connie shares, somehow your forms seem full of life so that I keep looking for their faces. And our panelist, Michelle, shares, I can't get over how much your work makes me feel so much, Kim, so incredibly beautiful. As I was watching your work, I can't be the only one who was getting goosebumps, not just at your work, but that you and Michelle are here at the same time. There are just so many exciting through lines. So thank you for chiming in the chat, Michelle, and thank you, Kim. We've got two more residents to introduce you to. Born into the dual diaspora of the Philippines and Ireland, Carol Ann Mcchrystal is a Los Angeles-based artist and designer. Her materially driven sculpture and video work through chemical processes and labor-intensive hand making to explore the legacy of colonialism and trade, as well as the ways in which the climate catastrophe has compounded these histories of inequity. Inhabiting the tension between Earth's immense history and the absurdly mundane everyday experience of plastic and labor, her practice consolidates painstakingly handmade and mass-produced consumables in order to pry open a speculative space in which to resist the means-ends rationale of late capitalism. I can't wait to learn more about her practice, so please join me in welcoming Carol Ann Mcchrystal to the Sitka Center.
Hi, thank you so much, Allison, for that introduction. For the past few years, my practice has been focused on forms of ancestral handicrafts that are specific to my familial homelands of Ireland and the Philippines. Specifically, I've been researching traditional practices of plant weaving in these regions and considering the relationship between the climate crisis and the disappearance of these traditions. I'm going to start with a series called Pasa Lubong. Each piece in this series takes the form of the woven sleeping mat, or what's called a banig in some Filipino languages. These objects have been ubiquitous in Filipino households for centuries. Traditionally, banig are made from the fibers of native plants like pandan, palms, and seagrass, but I hand weave my banig-inspired objects from non-traditional materials that are all products of oil extraction. I use these materials both because they're what I've got available in my urban American landscape, as well as to bring awareness to the economic stability of a migrant workforce created by increasing and intensifying ecological disaster that's caused by those extractive industries. I reuse existing and discarded materials in my work as a diasporic framework. It's kind of related to being in survival mode or to using whatever you have at hand to get by. This practice of collecting materials from my environment enables me to consider how raw resources like oil are extracted and transformed by humans into plastics, and how those plastics in turn get distributed around the world in service of capitalism. And at the same time, to consider the impact that this activity has on people and traditions at a local level. Blue tarp comes up again and again in my work as a way to think through responses to climate crisis on these local levels. For example, in the aftermath of typhoons in the Philippines, or hurricanes in Puerto Rico, or flooding in Louisiana. Rather than building resilient infrastructure, governments distribute these types of tarps to people whose homes have been damaged or destroyed, and it's a Band-Aid solution. It's also highly visible where I live in Los Angeles, being used as a form of shelter by people experiencing houselessness in the midst of the so-called affordable housing crisis. So for me, this material holds a special power in its ability to speak not only to climate catastrophe responses, but also to the root causes of the climate crisis. My work has been informed in some ways by Naomi Klein's writing about disaster capitalism, the concept that the entities that extract oil, refine petroleum, they're the very same ones that profit from increased and intensified catastrophe every year. And that includes the wars that are fought over these resources. So each piece in this series is titled Pasa Lubong, which means souvenir. So in one instance, I'm thinking about literal souvenirs of the tourism industry in the Philippines, an abstraction of the landscape to maintain one of the most profitable industries there. But at the same time, a Pasa Lubong can also mean a special kind of gift that's given because a Filipino is returning back to the Philippines. The concept of return is a particularly potent one in Filipino culture because forced migration has pretty much been institutionalized. Since the 1970s, the #1 grossing export of the Philippines has been human labor in the form of OFWs. OFWs are migrant workers that travel to do contract labor in countries all over the world. And they do this because the Philippine government has willfully underdeveloped the economy there. Pasa Lubong 9, which we're looking at now, is made from the materials of a balikbayan box, which is a large box that's sent or brought home to the Philippines after it has been filled with gifts and necessities from the country where the OFW is working. For me, the concept of a Pasa Lubong can encompass so many different directions that a souvenir or a resource can travel, including who's giving the gift, who's taking the gift, and why, especially when considered in a global context. Sometimes I speak about these works in the context of disappearing ancestral technologies and obsolescence that can be attributed to the extractive industries that dispossess Indigenous peoples and peasant communities from their lands, as well as quality of life and way of life. Huge multinational corporations seek out these resource-rich lands for purposes of mineral extractions and agribusiness. These deregulated private industries destroy local ecologies, not only for the people who rely on these resources for their livelihood, but also for our non-human kin who inhabit these realms. So without the ability to sustain themselves with the land or the sea according to their traditions, the young people of these communities are forced to leave toward urban areas, and the ancestral of the community disappears into obsolescence with the older generation. On the flip side, it's actually climate change induced. It's the climate change induced by all of this environmental destruction that ironically also helps to keep these traditions of mat weaving alive. In coastal communities, deforestation paired with government failure to provide proper infrastructure escalates the devastation of climate catastrophes. In a country where 15 to 20 named typhoons make landfall every year, entire communities, mostly rural and poor to begin with, must be rebuilt essentially from the ground up year after year. Many survivors of these scenarios have little opportunity to make an income or to buy basic necessities. And it is in this space that weaving and selling mats has come to the fore as one tenable option. So the use of weaving in these works is a means to critique empire, to reflect on life in diaspora, and to bring awareness to the ecological issues that are tied up in commodity production, shipping, and consumption here in the global north, in the global south, and in the inequitable relationships between the two. Simultaneously, I have also been exploring similar traditions in the Irish context. This piece, Sandstone Keepsake 1, is inspired by traditional Irish practices of plaiting floor mats from wild rushes. And it's made from materials scavenged and collected from the Burren region in the west of Ireland. This piece encapsulates all of the studies, tests, trials, and attempts to essentially brute force teach this handicraft to myself over the course of a 1-month residency there. In this work, I again use a diasporic lens to consider the places that my family has called home. Being back in Ireland while making this sculpture gave me pause to think about more closely how the UK's neoliberal policies and legacies of colonialism are responsible for shaping my family's migration story. These policies not only created the extremely bleak economic climate of the 1970s Ireland that made migration to the UK one of the only viable options for many of my dad's generation, but conversely, these policies were also responsible for bringing so many Filipino nursing students like my mom from the UK to the UK from the Philippines. In Sandstone Keepsake 1, the platted mat is arranged in relationship with a stack of locally mined paving stones 350 million years in the making, which were carved out from behind a very famous tourist hotspot, the Cliffs of Moher. The use of cobblestone here was inspired by the slogan of the 1968 French student protests and workers' strike. The phrase "beneath the paving stones, the beach" lives on as a call to action that reminds us that liberation is possible. Pointing to the use and interpretation of landscape, the stones are arranged in a form that recalls not only the rich history of dry stone wall building in Ireland, but also cairns. Humans have piled stones as navigational wayfinders for centuries, but they're now erected to access with no purpose in landscapes frequented by tourists. A part of the framework for these recent works is that they're only made when I'm in Ireland. The works so far are all made using locally harvested rushes, foraged rubbish, and locally sourced geologic elements. I consider them to be a once ocean, island, new landmass, and garbage patch. Each piece is named after one of the reconstructed tectonic supercontinents as a way to sort of fold back in the sense of geologic timescale in relation to the seemingly disposable materials at play. These works are titled after a poem called Sandstone Keepsake by Seamus Heaney. In the poem, Heaney turns a stone over and over in his hands, and this stone embodies his own struggle with what to do with his voice or political agency, specifically in the violent context of 1970s Troubles era Ireland. I made these objects as a call to action towards an earth-centered shift, asking the viewer to consider their own power to act in the face of capitalism's slow violence. In this particular piece, the cobblestones are sculpted from a very specific clay found in County Wexford, Ireland. This gesture is intended to point toward our own agency, not only in the sense that we all have the power to overturn the inequitable social systems that we humans have put in place, but that it is our responsibility to build the just world we want to live in. So this will be the sort of jumping off point for the studies and experiments I'm going to be working on while I'm here at Sitka. I'm working with creating looser, less controlled sculptures that continue to combine local organic matter together with single-use plastics and mineral content. I'll be taking a cue from the concept of conglomeration, or the geologic process by which smaller geologic bodies become collected and cemented together into a larger singular formation. I hope to follow the story of water as a geologic force to unravel something about the specific role of place in my work. For example, how is being geolocated here in coastal Oregon meaningful or not to the site-specific facets of my practice? So I'm continuing to use woven components again as a way to examine legacies of colonialism and imperialism. However, these studies will take an overview perspective by engaging more rigorously with the concept of our current geologic epoch, in which human industry has been an undeniable influence on climate and environment. As media theorist Jussi Parikka has observed, these future fossils or deep time artifacts, no distinction will be made between the natural and the manufactured, just as geology will make no such distinction in its records. Okay, and that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Carol Ann. I'll read some comments in the chat. Pasa Lubong number 7 is spookily attractive, the one made with single-use water bottles, shares Craig. Connie shares, thank you for sharing your deft weavings of materials, traditions, and political truths. Prune shares, lovely identification. What parts of Ireland give you these materials? Maybe you could type an answer in the chat if you can. Gabriella, your fellow resident, shares the meaning behind your work is so important. Thank you for the detail and the social, ecological, and political nature of your art. Thanks, everyone. We've got one more presenter, and I can't imagine a more wonderful voice to close out our resident talk season for 2021 and 2022. Altea Narici is a traveling musician and artist from Italy, researching ecology and wildlife-related topics through performance, composition, and community projects. She plays cello and sings across repertories from classical to traditional music to improvisation, and creates original songs about her travels and connection to the natural world. She writes on her blog at heronontheRoof.com, and you can find a link on our website. Since 2018, Altea has collaborated with wildlife researchers and science communicators, both as an artist and a research assistant in the field, exploring new creative approaches in outreach using art and creativity and involving diverse audiences. In 2021, she collaborated with Claudia Cesarini, creating the Eco Adventures Christmas 2021, a children's activity book about wildlife conservation around the world, as an illustrator and co-author, and by coordinating contributions by 4 conservation associates from Europe and the US. Altea is an ambassador artist of the International Yehudi Menuhin Foundation, which in 2020 supported her first solo project, New Worlds, in North America. The project is now resuming in 2022, bringing her again to the Sitka Center and across North America and Hawaii, following migratory routes of birds and whales, and connecting with local communities and conservation organizations along the way. After this journey, she plans to head back to Europe to start recording and releasing her music. Please welcome Altea Narici warmly back to Sitka.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you for this lovely welcome. I am so grateful to be here and to be part of this panel and this reunion. So as you were mentioning, I am really grateful to be back at Sitka and so soon. I was here in 2020. I was here when the pandemic started, and I owe you a gigantic thanks because you saved me during the first lockdown. I had nowhere to go. There were no flights to nowhere, and Sitka let me stay until I had a way to go back home. So when I was here in 2020, I was supported by the International Yehudi Menuhin Foundation. They supported my project New Worlds, which was supposed to see me travel across the US, Mexico, and Canada, sharing free concerts and workshops with local communities. And the pandemic started, so the project didn't go on as it was supposed to go, but I had already started connecting with the local community around Sitka, with the schools and cultural centers. So I'm really happy to be back here and be able to continue what I started then. So I'm going to talk a bit about what is happening in terms of performances, and then I will tell you a bit more about the creative process that I've been enjoying during my residency here again. So I have been doing the first event last Sunday at the Panther Creek Senior and Community Center. They had me play during their monthly community breakfast, and it was lovely to be back there. I played there in March 2020, and there were some community members approaching me on Sunday saying that the last time they managed to attend the breakfast was the time that I was playing there. So they remembered me and they told me about the last couple of years, how it has been for them. The community has changed so much. They have been through the wildfires as well. And it was lovely to be able to share music with them again and gather new stories and in a way, basically restart together on Sunday. Another project I'm really looking forward to see developing is my work with the Nestaka Valley School. For this, I owe a big thanks to 2 people. Bobby Stirling is the music teacher at Nestaka Valley School, an incredible music teacher, if you ask me. I'm learning so much just by working with her. And we're going to host 3 music lessons together with our pupils about music and movement. music and the sound in the ocean, which is what I study when I am a research assistant at sea, and about traditional music from Italy, which is also related to nature and spiders. That's a whole other story. And then I have to ask to say thanks to the Sitka Center Youth Arts Program manager, Liana Perry, because we are collaborating in creating a lesson for a lot of children across probably 2 counties in Oregon, which is going to be focused on sound and visual representation of sound. We're going to tell the children about animal vocalizations and how it is studied by researchers. It's called bioacoustics, and children are going to find out what a spectrogram is. They're going to create their own spectrogram. And well, this morning I was just out in the forest shooting a video for them. So I'm really excited about this. And I thank Liana for bearing with me and creating this adventure together. Another exciting news is that I got back in touch with the Chachalo Museum and Cultural Center in Grand Ronde, and it looks like that they may have me perform in their museum in a couple of weeks. I am really excited and really grateful to be able to give back to these wonderful people and to say thank you for the land they stewarded since millennia, and I am really looking forward to this opportunity. And finally, I will be a tutor for the first time at Sitka on the 1st of May, and I'm really looking forward to this chance too. I look forward to share my interest in sound and singing and songwriting with the participants. We're going to dive in the soundscape of Sitka, what the land has got to tell us in terms of noises and animal sounds and wind and river sounds. And we're going to take that all in, translate that into visuals, and make a composition together that we will be able to carry on and to use as a way to acknowledge our relationship to the sound of the land. So really looking forward to that too. And this time I am supporting my travels on my own, but thanks to some fundings that I received for my past research from an Italian fund, I'll be able to keep traveling after my residency at Sitka. And so I am planning to go to Hawaii and then to Mexico. And I am still gathering connections with cultural organizations and wildlife conservation associations on the grounds. So if any of you had any connections or tips, I am all ears. And finally, about the artistic process that I've been enjoying during this month. It's been fantastic to be back here. It's just, it moves me so much to have this space, to be able to join the outdoors. It's like, to me, it's a community, it's a Sitka community, it's the neighbors of Sitka. That's another community, it's the animals and the trees and the river. I want to thank the whole Sitka staff. I want to thank my neighbors, Elizabeth and Henry, for helping me settling in. They lent me a keyboard that has been super helpful in my voice work. I want to thank all my resident fellow artists and Mariah Reading for basically introducing me to river swimming, which has been incredibly fantastic and so inspiring for my creative process. So what I've been actually doing is exploring my voice in new ways and finding inspiration for this process in the land. And I've been listening to the wind and observing how the river flows, and I'm looking for those same processes in my own body when I produce sound. And that has been really clearer than any teacher I ever had. And this is something that I expected in a way before I left. Somebody was asking me, why don't you look for a teacher? And I said, I'm going to Sitka. Sitka will teach me to sing all over again. And this is actually happening, so thank you. Another project that I've been working on since the last couple of years is my first EP, my first extended play. It's an album which is going to be called Via, and it's really almost ready. I am looking forward to start recording and releasing it at the end of this year. And it's in a concept album, which is all for cello and voice. And the songs are made of different structures. Some of them don't have lyrics, some of them have lyrics but follow traditional songs forms. So it's really diverse. And I've been working on that and editing it, and I hope I can share some of that with you before I leave, also during this talk. I'm also working on new material, which I didn't expect. And this has been really fascinating to explore because it's completely different from what I've been writing so far. So I am imagining a wider set of instruments accompanying my songs. I am also exploring new topics that go from ecology to human psychology and relationships, and the relation between nature and societal situations and changes. And this has been really fun. I am really enjoying this because I am also leaving behind the idea of having to basically teach my audience about science, and it's more about enjoying my relationship with nature and let it go through my songs without looking for a sort of communication goal when I do it. And this has been freeing my songwriting process a lot and making it a lot more fun in a way. And I hope it will be the same for the audience when you will listen to it. And yes, last but not least, I have been working on an idea for a new project of songwriting and storytelling. I want to rediscover the figure of the traveling musician and bringer of news, the minstrel or troubadour or trouvière of the Middle Ages. But at the time, they were mostly male traveling musicians, and I would be one of the few women troubadours. And I also want to decline this role in an environmental way. I want to share stories and news about positive change in the interaction between human communities and environmental habitats and species. So to do this, I am exploring a character that is already part of my work, part of my songs, part of my website, that is the heron. And I am working with this character because I believe it embodies the idea of a profound connection with place, in the way that the heron is able to stand still and focused in between earth and water and air when it fishes. And also the ability that this animal has to travel across great distances and see things from above. And this is something that also I feel I in a way embody in being a traveling artist and choosing travel as a way of life. And so I am really excited about this project because I'm hoping it will be my way to keep traveling as part of my practice and creating chapters for every community that I will encounter. And when I will join the community, I will offer performances where I share the stories that I've gathered so far about environment and communities. And I will also host songwriting workshops so that the community can basically use me to create their own song about their own connection with their own land and seas. And in this way, we keep creating and sharing stories of positive change. The community has a space and opportunity to acknowledge their relationship with nature. And I keep building a repertoire that I can go then share around the world. So this has been really exciting to dive into. And I wanted to share this little video because as part of this idea of Heron's Tales, this idea of a traveling song storytelling show, I am also working on a costume because I want to be a heron that brings the audience on this magical music nature journey. And part of this costume will be a strap that I have been testing during my Panther Creek Community Center breakfast the other day, and I think it was very successful. I'm going to show you the potential of a strapped cello. This is a traditional one that I was playing. And that basically allowed me dance with my audience, which was really, really fun. I can't show more because I'd rather protect the privacy of the person who was dancing with me, but it kept going on for a little bit, and it was really, really a lot of fun. And I'm hoping that this will be a useful feature when interacting with my audience for the storytelling show. I also had a little helper. I don't show all of her, but here she was basically accompanying me as I sang my song. And I can't show a picture of that, but at the end of my breakfast show, she was playing the cello. Actually, she was where I am here, and she was doing a great job despite being tall just a half of me and the cello being taller than her. She was really enjoying it. So maybe there is a new cellist on the Oregon coast. And I wanted to share a little bit about my songs. I told you that some of them don't even have lyrics or have just a few of them. And this is Heron. I'm going to share just a little bit of it. And I have to press a special button here so that you can hear it. Yes. Yeah. So this is an idea of what one of my not structured pieces sound like. While this is inspired by a traditional Italian music form, the pizzica, and it's also part of my first EP in the workings, Via. And I wanted to share from 1 minute. Annaffiare le piante, cuocere il pane, guardare la vita che scorre di pianto, nascosta so che ci sei, amore di stelle negli occhi miei, amore di stelle negli occhi miei. E allora canto, ballo e sorrido, dolore ancora dietro alla porta, ma sono qui, già lo so, io oggi ti rivedrò, io oggi ti rivedrò. Bella, non è attraente, è una canzone che è niente di niente, ma mi fa ridere, mi fa svegliare, buoni motivi per starla a cantare, per starla a cantare. E allora canto, ballo e sorrido, e finalmente il dolore è passato e lascia una storia. E cosa farò? Oggi ve la racconterò, oggi ve la racconterò. Smilla era un cane, il mio cane bianco, una stella sul mio cammino, se guardi bene dentro i miei occhi la vedrai scodinzolare. Yeah, this one was Smile, and the last one I would like to share is The Girl Who Loves the Wind. Which I hope will be also a blessing towards my next travels, because it's a song about the love for traveling. I hope you will enjoy it. Can you tell me how far a girl who loves the wind can go? On wing of geese and turn from pole to pole and back again. Can you tell me how far a girl who loves the wind can go? Soft as a monarch flies, sunlight through the Hamburg's flow.
tell me how far a girl who loves the wind can go across this stunning wild old world. Tell me what her eyes will see, her hands will touch, the voice will sing.
And that was it.
Thank you so much, Altea, for sharing your music with us. I'll just read a couple of comments. Let's see, Ruth shares, thank you so much for following your personal muses and sharing with us. It's brave and so rewarding for the rest of us. The older we get, the more we should dance and sing. And blessings on you and your cello troubadours. And lots of thanks coming in. I want to thank Michelle, Gabriella, Kim, Carol Ann, and Altea for sharing their work with us tonight and taking us inside their practices. I want a special thank you to Tamara Jennings, Sitka's program manager, for curating such an extraordinary residency season, and all of you for supporting it. In the many ways you support Sitka, including your participation in these events. Tonight at the beginning, Michelle talked about one of her pieces being gently suspended together with threads. And that's how these online talks have felt to me. So many past and incoming residents have joined in for them, and in just in a whole new way. It feels like the Sitka residency community is connected. So thank you everyone for being a part of tonight and making this season special. We have a keynote with artist Ian Van Collar coming up on May 17th. So watch your Sitka newsletters for more information about that. And with that, I will wish all of you a wonderful good night, and wish our residents a wonderful completion to your residency time while you're with us at Sitka. Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.